You know that feeling, right?
Yeah.
You decide you need a new TV, you start looking, and bam, you're just drowning in acronyms.
Oh, yeah. OLED, Mini OLED, QD OLED, WLED.
NITs, VRR, LLM, HDMI 2.1. It's like this endless alphabet soup.
And blinding numbers.
Exactly. How do you even start to figure out what actually matters for, watching stuff?
It is really easy to get lost. I mean, manufacturers love throwing specs at you.
Mm-hmm.
But the real trick is understanding how those specs translate into what you actually see and experience at home.
Totally. And that's pretty much why we're doing this deep dive today. We've waded through a whole stack of detailed analyses, reviews, spec sheets, all the source materials.
Yeah.
Covering the brand new 2025 TV lineups from the big three, Sony, Samsung, and LG.
And we're looking at everything, their absolute top-of-the-line flagships, but also those mid-tier models that are getting seriously impressive these days.
Right. So our mission here is basically to cut through all that noise, pull out the most important insights from the sources, show you what's genuinely new and maybe even surprising this year.
And where the real value is hiding.
Yeah, and help you figure out which TV might actually be the right fit for you, depending on what you care about most.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this.
So 2025. It sounds like a pretty big year for TVs based on these sources.
It really is shaping up to be a landmark year, especially for OLED technology, actually.
Oh, how so?
They're seeing brightness jumps in OLED that, honestly, people thought weren't really possible just a short while ago.
Wow.
And at the same time, Mini LED isn't standing still either. It's really refining its game, becoming a much stronger competitor across the board.
Okay, so the big trends that jump out from the sources seem to be, pushing boundaries everywhere, right? Like huge increases in brightness, not just OLED.
Right.
Serious upgrades in gaming features seem to be everywhere.
Across the board.
And this advanced AI processing stuff is showing up more even in like the less super expensive models.
Exactly. And Sony, Samsung, LG, they aren't just putting out new model numbers. They each have pretty distinct strategies this year.
Right.
For how they're tackling both that premium, cutting-edge market and this really crucial mid-range.
Where a lot of people actually buy their TVs.
Precisely. Where you're looking for the best bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Understanding those different approaches kind of helps make sense of their whole lineup.
Okay, good point. So maybe let's start at the top with the flagships.
Makes sense. That's where we see the absolute bleeding edge tech.
And it often gives hints about what might trickle down later.
Yeah, this is where the innovation is fastest, and honestly, the numbers are the biggest.
Okay, so Sony. Their flagship is the Bravia 8. And reading the analyses, this is where it gets really interesting, right?
It really is. Sony made a fundamental shift here.
They moved to QD OLED technology for this model.
Yep, that's a big change from the MALOD panels, the more traditional ones they've used in their top OLEDs before this.
And why the switch? Is it about brightness?
Directly tied to it. This switch to QD OLED allows for a really significant brightness leap. The analyses show the Bravia 830 is about 25% brighter than last year's A95L, which was already great.
Yeah.
And a massive 50% brighter than the original Bravia 8.
Okay, that's huge.
And it's powered by their enhanced XR processor, which, Sony is known for its sophisticated AI for picture processing, motion handling.
But all that premium tech comes with a premium price tag, I assume.
It does. The sources peg it at $4,000 for the 65-inch model.
Oof. Okay.
That makes it the most expensive flagship among these three this year.
And another thing the sources mention, initial sizes are a bit limited.
Yeah, just 55 and 65 inches to start with.
Okay. Let's move over to Samsung. Their flagship is the S95F.
Right, and the buzz around this one, based on the sources, is that it's really the pinnacle of QD OLED for 2025.
And the brightness numbers, I mean, you used the word staggering before, but looking at the reports.
They are eye-watering. This TV is reportedly capable of hitting 4,000 nits peak brightness.
4,000?
4,000 peak. And 440 nits, full screen, sustained brightness.
So the insight here from the sources is pretty clear. Samsung is gunning for the brightness crown in OLED this year.
Absolutely. If maximum HDR impact is what you're after, that 4,000 nit number just jumps off the page.
And they've brought back that anti-glare coating.
Yes, the anti-glare 2.0 coating is back and refined on the S95F. Reviews say it's exceptional at killing reflections without messing up the picture.
That's a big deal for bright rooms.
Huge advantage if you've got windows or lamps nearby. And for gamers, Samsung is really pushing hard here too.
Yeah.
Introducing 165 Hz refresh rates.
Okay.
And crucially, packing in 4 full HDMI 2.1 ports.
That is important. No compromises needed for multiple consoles or a PC and soundbar.
Exactly. And it's all driven by their NQ4 AI Gen 3 processor. They're talking about using like 128 neural networks for its AI enhancements.
Sounds fancy. What about the price?
It's actually quite competitive for a flagship, coming in at $3,299 for the 65-inch.
Okay. Under the Sony.
But one caveat the sources consistently mention is the return of the panel lottery.
Meaning
The really big 83-inch S95F actually uses a traditional walled panel, not the super bright QD OLED tech found in the smaller 55, 65, and 77-inch sizes.
Okay, so something buyers definitely need to be aware of if they want that specific size.
Definitely.
All right, and the third player, LG. Their flagship is the G5 OLED.
And LG's taken a really bold step this year. They've actually moved away from the micro lens array, or MLA tech, they were using last year in the G4.
Oh, interesting. So what's the new thing?
Their big innovation for the G5 is a completely new panel structure.
Yeah.
It's a 4-stack OLED panel design, which their branding is RGB Tandem.
4-stack, okay. And the goal there is?
Purely about getting more light out more efficiently. This new panel tech lets the G5 deliver a reported 45% higher brightness compared to last year's G4.
45%. So everyone's chasing brightness this year.
It's the big theme. And like Samsung, LG is also matching those top gaming specs, 165 Hz refresh rates across most sizes, and again, 4 full HDMI 2.1 ports.
Good to see consistency there.
It runs on their new Alpha 11 AI Gen 2 processor and the latest WebOS 25 smart platform. They're adding some new AI tricks too, like AI Voice ID,
What's that?
where the TV can supposedly recognize who's talking to it and adjust picture or sound settings accordingly. And something called AI Concierge for recommendations.
Okay, and the price for the LG G5?
The 65-inch is priced at $3,399.
Okay, so right smack bang between the Sony and the Samsung.
Exactly.
So just looking at these flagships, wow, the competition is intense.
It really is.
The huge brightness leaps, especially seeing OLED push that hard, that's clearly the headline story from the sources.
Absolutely.
And the whole race for higher refresh rates, more HDMI 2.1 ports,
Yeah.
it just underlines how central gaming has become, even at the very high end.
No question. These flagships are pushing the absolute boundaries of what's possible right now. And, you know, the technologies they're pioneering here, that's what we'll eventually see trickle down.
Which is a perfect transition, actually. Let's talk about the part that probably gets a lot more people excited, the mid-tier.
Right, their smart money zone.
Yeah, where you can often find that sweet spot, getting a huge chunk of that flagship performance, but for significantly less cash.
And the sources really back this up. The savings we're seeing this year can be pretty substantial. Anywhere from, say, $600 up to a massive $2,200 compared to those flagships we just discussed.
$2,000, okay.
And the tech that's actually making its way down into this tier in 2025 is particularly impressive. So maybe we should break down what each company is offering here.
Yeah, let's do that. Maybe focus on some key features people care about, like brightness first. How does that stack up in the mid-tier?
Okay, so in the mini LED space, which is often brighter overall, Samsung's QN90F looks really strong. It's $2,299 for the 65-inch, and sources say it hits around 2,500 nits peak brightness.
That's very bright, especially for HDR.
Very bright. Then you have Sony's Bravia 7, also a mini LED. That one comes in at $1,799 for the 65-inch.
Represents a $2,200 saving versus the Bravia 8.2 flagship. Wow.
Exactly. And it's still putting out around 2,000 nits peak. Also quite bright.
Okay.
LG has their QN890 2A, another mini LED, also priced at $5,799. It's competitive, but the sources put its peak brightness a bit lower, around 1,200 nits.
Okay, so mini LEDs are generally punching high on brightness here. What about OLED options in the mid-tier?
Right, so Samsung has their S90F OLED at $2,299 for the 65-inch. And this one's interesting because it hits around 1,500 nits peak.
That's actually really good for an OLED at that price point, isn't it?
It really is. Much brighter than you typically expect. Then there's LG's classic C series, the C5 OLED. It's priced a bit higher at $2,699 for the 65-inch.
And its brightness.
More in line with traditional OLED brightness levels. Sources say around 800 nits peak, though they do note it's an improvement over last year's C4.
Okay.
And then LG also has their entry-level OLED, the B5, estimated around $799. It's likely around 700 nits peak.
So quick insight here based on the sources. Mini LED generally still wins the peak brightness battle in this mid-tier.
Generally, yes.
But Samsung's S90F OLED is bringing surprisingly strong brightness for an OLED into this price range.
That's a key differentiator for them, yeah.
Okay, what about gaming? That's a huge factor for lots of people. How do the mid-tier models compare there?
This is a really key battleground in the sources. Samsung's QN90F Mini LED, the bright one we just mentioned, is a leader here too.
How so?
It boasts those 165 Hz refresh rates and it has the full 4 HDMI 2.1 ports.
Okay, same as their flagship, basically.
Pretty much. Their S90F OLED is also strong for gaming 144 Hz refresh rates, and again, 4 HDMI 2.1 ports.
Good. And LG?
LG C5 OLED matches that, 144 Hz refresh rates and 4 HDMI 2.1 ports.
Okay, so good options there. What about the others?
LG's more affordable B5 OLED and their QNED92A Mini LED both offer 120 Hz refresh rates, which is still great for consoles. And they also have 4 HDMI 2.1 ports.
Ah, interesting. So where's the catch, or the difference?
The main difference highlighted in the sources is actually with Sony's mid-tier offerings here.
Oh.
Both the Bravia 7 Mini LED and their Bravia 5 Mini LED, while they support VRR and LM for gaming.
Yeah.
They're limited to only 2 HDMI 2.1 ports that can handle 4K at 120 Hz. The other ports are HDMI 2.0.
Only 2. Okay, that's a significant difference.
It really is. So, key insight. If you've got, say, a PS5 and an Xbox Series X, or maybe a high-end PC and a soundbar using eRRC,
right,
having those 4 full-bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports is a massive practical advantage. And the sources show Samsung and LG are generally providing more of those ports in their mid-tier lineups this year compared to Sony.
That's a really important detail. Okay, what about the brains behind the operation, the processing and AI? Does that differ much in the mid-tier?
It absolutely does, and it really affects how the picture looks, how motion is handled, how the TV operates overall.
So what's Sony doing here? You mentioned their processor earlier.
Yeah, Sony's making a really strong play in the mid-tier, particularly with the Bravia 7. They're actually using their flagship XR cognitive processor in that model.
The same one as the expensive Bravia 8 too.
The very same.
Yeah.
And the sources consistently praise this processor for its superior upscaling of lower res content and its really smooth motion handling.
That can make a big difference, especially if you watch a lot of cable or streaming.
Huge difference. The Bravia 5, which is their entry mini LED, also at $11,799, uses similar core tech, the XR Backlight Master Drive, for controlling the backlight, but with fewer dimming zones than the 7 or the flagship 9.
Okay. What about Samsung's processors in the mid-tier?
It's a bit of a mix. The QN90F Mini LED and the S90F OLED actually get the flagship NQ4 AI Gen 3 processor.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But their step-down mini LED, the QN85F, which is estimated around $1,499, uses the NQ4 AI Gen 2 processor. Still good, but a step below. Samsung's really pushing their Vision AI for optimizing the picture and other AI features across these.
And LG.
Their C5 OLED and the QN92A Mini OLED both use the Alpha 9 AI processor Gen 8. So, similar processing power between those two key mid-tier models.
Okay.
But their budget B5 OLED steps down quite a bit to the older Alpha 7 Gen 5 processor. And LG, as we mentioned, ties its AI features like Voice ID and Concierge to their WebOS 25 platform.
So another insight here, processor quality definitely varies within the mid-tier. It's not just about the panel type.
Not at all. It impacts upscaling, motion, those AI features.
And Sony seems to be bringing its best processing further down the range with the Bravia 7.
Right.
While Samsung and LG are clearly tiering their processors within the mid-range itself.
Exactly. It's another factor you need to weigh up.
Okay, one more specific feature.
Yeah.
What about dealing with bright rooms? Any standouts there in the mid-tier?
Yes. This is where Samsung has a really unique advantage this year, according to the sources.
What's that?
They've actually brought that excellent anti-glare 2.0 coating down to the QN90F Mini LED.
The $2,299 one.
That's the one. And this is a really big deal.
Why is that?
Because reflections are often a major weakness for Mini LED and LCD TVs in general, especially compared to OLEDs, which tend to have less reflective screens.
Oh, right.
So having that top-tier anti-glare on a bright Mini LED like the QN90F makes it a prime contender if your living room isn't, a dedicated blackout home theater cave. Their flagship S95F OLED also has this coating, of course.
So Sony and LG Mini LEDs in the mid-tier don't have that.
The sources indicate they don't have an equivalent high-performance anti-glare layer, no.
Yeah.
The Sony Bravia 7 is bright, but lacks it.
Okay, that's another crucial difference for real-world viewing. What about screen sizes? Any trends there in the mid-tier?
Yeah, this is where Mini LED often provides amazing value if you want to go really big.
Like how big?
The sources mention models like Samsung's QN90F and LG's QNED92A, extending up to massive sizes, think 100 inches, even 115 inches in Samsung's case, using panels sourced from TCL actually.
Wow, 115.
And you can get these huge screens for prices significantly lower than a comparable, say, 83-inch OLED. Sony's Bravia 5 Mini LED also goes up to a hefty 98 inches.
And OLED sizes in this tier?
They're available typically up to 77 inches, sometimes 83 inches like the Samsung S90F or LG C5. But the price really jumps significantly once you go past that 77-inch mark for OLED.
Right, so Mini LED is king for massive screen value.
Generally, yes.
Okay, so pulling this mid-tier section together, it's packed with value, clearly borrowing tons from the flagship.
Absolutely.
But understanding these crucial differences, the sources point out like the exact brightness levels, whether it has anti-glare, the number of HDMI 2.1 ports, the processor inside. That's absolutely key to finding the right TV for your specific needs and budget.
Couldn't agree more. It's not just about picking OLED or Mini LED anymore. The details matter.
Let's maybe do a quick head-to-head then, based on everything we've seen in the sources. OLED versus Mini LED in 2025.
Okay, quick showdown. Brightness-wise.
The gap is closing.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
With tech like Samsung's QD OLED hitting that reported 4,000 nits peak on the S95F, OLED is getting incredibly bright.
But Mini LED still wins overall.
It still generally maintains higher sustained or full screen brightness in many cases. And models like Samsung's QN90F Mini LED reaching 2,500 nits peak is still extremely bright for HDR highlights. So Mini LED might still have an edge for searing highlights in very bright rooms.
Okay. But contrast and black levels, that's still OLED's territory, right?
Absolutely, no contest there. OLED's self-emissive pixels mean each one can turn completely off. Perfect black, infinite contrast. Mini LED has gotten much better with more dimming zones, but it still relies on a backlight, so you can sometimes see blooming or halo effects around bright objects on a dark background.
Right. And viewing angles.
OLED generally wins there too. The picture tends to be more consistent in terms of color and brightness, even when you're watching from off to the side. Mini LED can sometimes wash out a bit more off angle.
And that anti-glare feature we keep mentioning.
That's a big differentiator this year, specifically with Samsung putting their anti-glare 2.0 on both their flagship OLED S95F and a key Mini LED QN90F. It really helps tackle reflections, which can be more bothersome on the typically glossier screens, whether OLED or Mini LED without good anti-glare.
Good point. What about the old concern burn-in for OLED?
Okay, so Mini LED being LCD-based has zero risk of burn-in.
Right.
OLED technology has improved massively over the years with things like pixel shifting, logo detection, screensavers, and just more robust panel materials. For most people watching varied content, movies, TV shows, gaming, it's really become a non-issue or a very low theoretical risk.
It's still possible with really static images for extreme lengths of time.
Theoretically, yes. If you, say, left a bright static news ticker on screen for hundreds and hundreds of hours straight, you might eventually see some retention. But for normal use, the sources suggest it's far less of a concern than it used to be.
Okay. And finally, value, especially at big sizes.
Mini LED is the clear value winner when you want to go big. Once you get above, say, 75 or 77 inches, the price of Mini LED TVs is significantly lower than comparable OLEDs. You can get a truly massive 85, 98, or even 100-plus inch Mini LED for what a 77-inch or maybe 83-inch OLED might cost.
Makes sense. Okay, we touched on gaming specs earlier, but just to recap what really matters for someone buying a TV for gaming.
Right. Refresh rate is one thing. We saw top models hitting 165 hertz, others at 144 hertz or 120 hertz.
But the key thing is...
Key thing is remembering that 165 hertz is really only beneficial for high-end PC gaming right now.
Okay.
Your PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X still max out at 120 hertz, so 120 hertz or 144 hertz is plenty for console gamers.
Got it. And the ports?
The number of HDMI 2.1 ports is critical. We saw how Sony's mid-tier only offers 2, while Samsung and LG generally offer 4 across their flagships and most mid-tier models.
And why 4 matters again?
Because HDMI 2.1 is needed for 4K at 120 hertz, VRR, LLM, all the key next-gen gaming features if you have multiple consoles or a PC, plus maybe a soundbar using the ERRC feature, which often uses one of the HDMI 2.1 ports.
You run out of ports fast with only 2.
Exactly. 4 gives you much more flexibility without needing to swap cables or buy switches.
And input lag. Is that still a thing?
It's becoming less of a differentiator because almost all these new TVs, when you put them in game mode, have incredibly low input lag, usually well under 10 milliseconds.
Which is great news for responsiveness.
Fantastic news for gamers.
Yeah.
It means the time between you pressing a button and seeing the action on screen is minimal.
Okay. And the processors, we talked about picture quality, but they're doing more now, right? With AI and smart features.
Yeah, absolutely. Beyond just the core picture stuff like upscaling low-res content really well, which is super important, and handling motion smoothly, these processors are increasingly driving the AI features. Things like automatically optimizing the picture based on the genre of content, or personalizing recommendations, or like LG's AI Voice ID recognizing who's talking.
Or Samsung's AI upscaling, trying to make HD look closer to 4K.
Exactly. So the power of the processor isn't just about the raw picture quality anymore. It's also about the intelligence and responsiveness of the whole TV experience. It's becoming a really significant differentiator, even if two TVs seem to have similar panel specs on paper.
Right. Okay, so connecting all these threads from the sources, the really big takeaway for you, the listener, seems to be the incredible value proposition emerging in that mid-tier for 2025.
Absolutely. You can genuinely get, 70, 80, maybe even 90% of the flagship performance and key features.
For significantly less money, we're talking potentially saving $600 to over $2,000.
That's right. These mid-tier TVs are borrowing heavily from the top models this year, more so than ever before, it seems.
So maybe let's try and crystallize this with some potential recommendations, based purely on what the sources highlight for different kinds of users or priorities.
Okay, let's try. So say you're primarily a console gamer, you've got a PS5 or Xbox Series X, maybe both, and you watch in a typical living room, not a pitch black cave.
Right.
Based on the sources, the Samsung QN90F Mini LED at $2,299 looks like a really compelling package.
Why that one specifically?
You get that high mini LED brightness, which is great for HDR in games. You get the anti-glare 2.0 coating, which is huge for dealing with room reflections during the day. And critically, you get those 4 full HDMI 2.1 ports for your consoles, and maybe a soundbar, plus 165 Hz if you ever hook up a PC.
Okay, strong all-rounder. What if the budget's a bit tighter?
If your budget is closer to $1,800, and you know that having only 2 HDMI 2.1 ports is definitely enough for your specific setup, then Sony's Bravia 7 Mini LED at $1,799 is a really strong contender. You lose the anti-glare and 2 high-speed ports, but you gain Sony's excellent XR processing for picture quality and upscaling, and it's still very bright at 2,000 nits.
Okay. What about the PC gamer who really prioritizes that perfect OLED, black level, and near instant response time?
For that user, LG C5 OLED at $2,699 seems like the classic reliable choice according to reviews. You get the inherent OLED benefits, 144 Hz refresh rate, 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, and LG supports Dolby Vision HDR, which Samsung doesn't.
But you accept lower overall brightness than the mini LEDs.
Right, you need slightly more controlled lighting for the best experience compared to those super bright mini LEDs. As an alternative, Samsung's S90F QD OLED at $2,299 is really tempting too.
Why is that?
It gets you into QD OLED tech, which offers vibrant colors at a lower price than the LG C5. It also has 144 Hz and 4 HDMI 2.1 ports.
But the trade-offs are...
You get HDR10 Plus instead of Dolby Vision, and you have that potential panel lottery depending on the size you buy.
Okay, let's switch gears. What if someone's main concern is just watching TV and movies in a really bright room, lots of windows, daytime viewing?
Here, that Samsung QN90F Mini LED at $2,299 really stands out again in the analyses.
Because of it.
The combination of its high peak brightness 2500 nits and that anti-glare 2.0 coating, that pairing is designed precisely for battling bright environments.
Makes sense. Any other contenders for bright rooms?
Sony's Bravia 7 is also very bright at 2000 nits and cheaper at $7,799. But remember, it lacks that advanced anti-glare coating, so reflections might be more of an issue depending on your specific room layout.
Okay. How about the opposite, the cinema enthusiast? Someone who prioritizes picture accuracy, detail, maybe watches in a darker room.
For that user, Sony's processing often gets nods. So the Bravia 7 Mini LED at pushing $799 again looks strong, benefiting from that flagship level XR processor for really accurate colors, great upscaling of older movies, and smooth motion.
But it's mini LED, not OLED.
Right. If you want the absolute perfect blacks and that true cinematic pop that OLED provides, especially with Dolby Vision content.
Then the LG C5 OLED.
Then the LG C5 OLED at $2,699 is the go-to, assuming your room allows for it. Darker viewing conditions are preferred. It's kind of the benchmark for that authentic cinema feel.
And the Samsung S90F as an alternative here too.
Yeah, the S90F QD OLED at $2,299 offers those really vibrant QD OLED colors at a lower price point, which some might prefer for movies, but again, you're accepting HDR 10 plus instead of Dolby Vision.
Okay, last category. Just budget conscious, but still wants premium features around that, say, $1,800 mark.
Yeah.
What are the top picks from the sources there?
You actually have several excellent choices this year at roughly $7,799 for a 65-inch.
Okay.
Sony's Bravia 7 Mini LED gets you that premium processing and high brightness. Great value if the two HDMI 2.1 ports aren't a deal breaker.
Okay.
LG's B5 OLED gets you access to OLED's core strengths, the perfect blacks, wide viewing angles at the most affordable price point for OLED. You sacrifice some brightness and processing power compared to the C5, but it's still OLED. And LG's QNED 92A is their mini LED option at that price. It might not be as bright as the Sony or Samsung mini LEDs, but it uses a good processor, the Alpha 9, same as the C5. And importantly, it gives you 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, unlike the Sony at this price.
Wow. Okay, so lots of strong competition right around that $1,800 price point.
Really strong competition. It forces you to prioritize what matters most to you.
So wrapping this all up, the really clear takeaway from diving into all these 2025 TV sources is that the mid-tier is where so much of the exciting value is landing this year.
Unprecedented value, I'd say. Features that were strictly high-end just a year or two ago are now available at much more accessible prices.
But the flip side is, the best TV isn't just one specific model anymore, is it?
Not at all. It genuinely depends entirely on your specific situation. Your room lighting, how you actually use the TV, mostly gaming, mostly movies, bit of everything, and which specific features like that anti-glare coating or the number of HDMI 2.1 ports or maybe Sony's processing really matter the most to you.
Hopefully, by digging into these sources and pulling out these comparisons and insights, we've managed to make that decision process feel a little less overwhelming.
Yeah, cut through some of that jargon and highlight the things that actually make a difference in the real world.
So if we try and connect this to the bigger picture, looking ahead.
Well, with OLED getting so much brighter now, really challenging Mini LED on one of its key advantages.
Right.
And Mini LED getting more refined, more affordable, and adding features like really effective anti-glare.
The lines are blurring.
The distinct lines between these two dominant technologies are definitely getting blurrier, aren't they? It makes you wonder, how much longer will they feel like truly separate categories?
Yeah, what's the next step?
Exactly. What new innovations, maybe combining the best of both, will emerge next year to bridge that gap even further? Or maybe create something entirely new?
Definitely something for you to think about as you navigate your own TV choices this year.